is the BJ Show, and what would the BJ Show be without John Combest? Good morning, John.
Good morning, Brad.
John's the guy that puts together this amazing list on johncombest.com. It's COMBEST, johncombest.com. Every single morning for the last 23 years of his life, he puts together this extensive list of all the important things that are going on around the state of Missouri, and you can look at it for absolutely positively free. There's not even any ads on it. Talk about that for a deal. All you have to do is just go to johncombest.com. Now, sometimes it's 20, 30, sometimes 40, 50, 60 kind of items, or number of items. But what we do is we bring in this guy right here. Oh, hold it. He didn't come into the building. Casey, come on in. Come on in. The door's open.
I'm Casey Kasem.
There he is. And he counts us down. Well, how do you do this, Casey?
Now on with the countdown.
And we start with?
In third place,
a bill to keep Missouri's SNAP recipients from buying candy and soda falls short. This story brought to us by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the always appropriately named Ezra Bitterman. You and I talked about this a little bit over the last few weeks, Brad, and it's a proposal from a gentleman named Jamie Gregg. It looks like Greg, Gragg, but he will tell you, via the great Garrett Bowles show a couple months ago, it's not pronounced Greg, it's pronounced Greg. Get it right. Anyway, initially, Representative Gregg said the bill was necessary to to curb the junk food epidemic. But as you and I discussed on the air, Brad, the trouble is, where do you define what a junk food is? Where do you define what a soda is? In fact, a Democrat state rep, a guy named Doug Clemens from St. Anne, he's a really strange guy because he's a straight white male Democrat. You don't see many of those anymore. But he called the definition of soda a little broad, and he pointed out that under the definition of soda, Pedialyte, which is a common oral rehydration solution, would be included because the definition is you can't use your welfare money to buy, quote, non-alcoholic beverages that contain natural or artificial sweeteners. So the short of it is, Brad, this bill needs a lot more work. And it reminds me of back in the late 90s, I remember going to a meeting when I was back in college, and I heard a speech from a man named David Clarich, a legend in St. Louis County politics, and particularly in Missouri politics on the Republican side. And he was talking about the fact that if you want to kill a bill, you don't just vote against it. Sometimes you could love it to death. Brad, you remember the era when folks started carrying cell phones in cars? Clarich was talking about that bill back in the 90s, and he said, I think people are going to love it to death. Instead of saying you can't just use your phone in a car, somebody will get on the floor and say, well, guess what? How about you can't fiddle with a radio? How about you can't fiddle with something in your glove compartment? So long story short, Brad, this bill is going to need some work over the interim and between the end of this session and the beginning of the next one. I bet Jamie Ray Gregg brings it back next year with a lot tighter definitions.
John, you bring up two interesting points. First off, I consider anything you buy at Whole Foods to be junk food. And secondly, when radio was first introduced into the car, and keep in mind this wasn't until I think like the late 20s or early 30s or something like that, that's exactly what people said. People said, oh my God, we can't have a radio in cars because that will distract drivers. No, seriously, that was one of the things. And matter of fact, one of the companies that spearheaded the whole radio thing was Motorola. Motorola was big in car radios back in the day. God, there's a company. John, do you ever follow Motorola? I know it's sort of split in a couple different companies, didn't it?
No, I don't.
Okay, there was a company that at one point in time just had the world by the tail. I mean, they made car radios for years, and then they sort of lost that out to the Japanese with Kenwood and things like that. And then they were huge in the two-way business, and originally they were one of the pioneers in the cellular industry. I don't think anybody has Motorola equipment and cell sites anymore. I think it's just totally gone. The only thing they're doing now is essentially police radios and things like that. God, they were back in the day. That was a monster company.
Interesting. Brad.
Well, I mean, it was interesting because at one point in time, to give you an idea, as I was a big user of Motorola two-way equipment for my traffic network, we used this at the time, very sophisticated system called a trunking radio system, which is now used by almost every police department in the country. But there was a time when they had a big demonstration in Chicago, and they flew us all from St. Louis to Chicago. Literally, we met at Lambert Field in the terminal, and they put us on, I want to say it might have been on a like a 727 or so. It was a big plane. And they flew us to Chicago, had luxury motor coaches pick us up at the airport, take us out to Schaumburg, where the headquarters were, wined and dined us.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, it was, and the campus there was amazing, but they're just like a small fraction of what they used to be. Because
hey, you know who's got a great campus, Brad? I don't know how we got on Motorola, but who has a great campus is a subject to story number 2.
Well, you know, can I forgot to say something. Is this going to be about university stuff?
It is not, Brad, but I'm just looking desperately for a transition to get us off old-timey Motorola talk and into the top 3.
Well, John, once upon a time I had this really nice Motrack in my car, and I had an HT220 portable radio.
Up a notch to number 2.
This Week in Missouri Politics, TWMPDaily, got Faughn yesterday. Originally, he was going to have a guy named Rusty Black in. And based on context clues and Scott's facial expressions and body language, Rusty had to flake because he actually had some stuff going on at the Missouri House. So Scott went through the big topics of the day, a few pieces that you'll be interested in, Brad, which is one of the reasons why I bring it up in story number 2. Let's start close to home. Ann Wagner announces that she has about $3.8 million in the bank for her next reelection, Brad. She raised, I think, if I recall the numbers correctly, she raised about $800,000 in this last quarter. Now, Brad, there will surely be candidates that come around, kind of like Ray Hartman last year, that pretend that they're going to run a campaign, and people who are chronic underdogs are going to say, yeah, you never know, the underdog's going to win. And Ann Wagner will shut them down. And national Democrats are even making noise. They do this fantasy booking where they fantasize that they'll find a decent candidate and be able to raise money. But that anecdote just shows, Brad, that once again, Ann Wagner is in the pole position, so to speak. So she'll have another easy race in 2026. Another piece that I think you'll be interested in involves Crystal Quade. She was one of your favorite candidates for governor. Do you remember her, Brad?
I do. And matter of fact, I took a spelling class over her.
Oh, you did? What's that?
I learned how to spell her name correctly, remember?
That's right. I forgot the billboard.
She had the billboard with her name wrong on it.
Yeah, so Crystal Quade has started a brand new organization called BeHeard Missouri. And according to the Whispering Gallery, which you could subscribe to via the Missouri Times, put together by the great Jake Croson, Quade plans on using the new organization to, quote, build an electoral arm that advances the values of equity, justice, and democracy. Now, I was wrong, Brad. I thought that Crystal Quade would run in 2026 for a state Senate seat down there. But if she's starting this organization, I imagine she'll see it through and she'll stay doing this statewide campaign thing, this kind of PAC, activist group, whatever. It'll allow her to travel the state of Missouri on other people's dime, have some good meals, travel around, be an inspiration, probably give some, social justice, girl power talks, whatever losing candidates do for other Democrats in Missouri. So it's good news for Crystal. I think she's done losing elections. I imagine that the last race was probably enough for her. And she can just go around the state now and teach other candidates how to be on the ballot.
Is she replacing DEI with EJD? Is that what she's doing?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope. Yeah, EJD. That's a good acronym, Brad. I like that. Look for your local neighborhood university to replace DEI. And speaking of universities, what I wanted to get to in point number 2 was that Scott has a fantastic mini dissertation on Washington University. And I have timestamps up today. I will say I agree with everything my friend Scott says about Washington University. I can't even do it justice. There's a great joke in there, a great reference in there to Palestinian protests. And I heard this, and I haven't laughed that hard in a long time. So Scott really does it. Also, he flagged, let me note real quick too, Brad, that Scott flagged the fundraising numbers for the St. Charles County exec race. And this is also reported by Jake Croson. Your friend Mike Elam, who kicks off his campaign, I believe, if not tomorrow, maybe on Friday. Do you know what day that is, Brad?
Tomorrow night.
Okay, tomorrow night. He kicks it off tomorrow night. And Mike Elam raised a little over $5,000 for the quarter, and he has $22,000 on hand. Bill Eigel raised $124,000 for the quarter, including $100,000 that he loaned himself. So if you take that out, Eigel raised $24,000, not counting his own loan, and he has, counting his loan, $158,000. Jason Law reports that he raised $547,000 from 133 donors. He raised 440 of it in the first quarter, and he has 440 cash on hand. So, as of now, a distinct cash on hand advantage for Jason Law.
You know, I would think would be interesting, and I think you and I could probably answer that question. Of the Jason Law money is probably about 95% from outside of St. Charles County. I mean, already, wasn't it just, you said, was it last year we talked about this, and he got $400K from the guy in Huntley?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago we talked about it, yeah.
And then he got, I remember I told you he'd had the big fundraiser out at Meadowbrook Country Club, and I made the comment about nothing but Dems go to Meadowbrook Country Club.
Yeah, that was an interesting anecdote. Now, Law's campaign reports, at least via Jake Croson, Jake may have added these numbers up himself, that he raised that money from 133 donors. So, Brad, you may be making a good point here in that if I was Eigel or Elam, I would maybe make a simple pie chart that says, hey, this guy gets a lot of money from outside. Now, that assumes that people care, Brad, and that we know that people make up stories about Jason Law and petty stuff about mayors' events or whatever.
I didn't make
and
that
silly
up.
Stuff, and people are mad, I'm sure, that he's raised a lot of money. But yeah, I would imagine that out of county money would make a cute little pie chart that nobody would care about.
Okay, EJD, equity, justice, and democracy, was that what it was?
I think maybe it's diversity. No, it's probably democracy. Crystal knows better than to use diversity. Yeah, equity, justice, and democracy by Crystal Quade.
EJD, okay.
It also stands for extra juicy donk.
I'm not touching that. Okay, here we go.
I'd like to.
The number one.
The Wall Street Journal headline, a gentleman named Patrick Thomas. Farmer's favorite weed killer nears its end, Bayer warns. German company cites mounting costs from Roundup, cancer litigation. Brad, this piece, and I have a paywall-free version up today, of course, on my website, and this piece says that Bayer is starting to signal that maybe they've come to the end of the line on Roundup, their popular farm and backyard residential weed killer. The active ingredient is known as glyphosate. We've covered many times the fact that there's Missouri legislation that would protect Bayer from liability lawsuits, making sure that the EPA label was just enough that the company needed to cover itself for liability. So the Wall Street Journal, Brad, reporting now that Bayer says maybe they're at the end of the line for glyphosate. Have we talked about glyphosate before, Brad? Did anybody say that maybe Bayer was probably going to dump glyphosate?
John, you talked about that, but here's my quick question for you. It's off patent, correct?
Correct, yeah.
So anybody can make it now, right?
Absolutely they can, for sure.
So wouldn't they be smart to just offload it to somebody else?
You know, here's the thing, Brad. Back on, and I helpfully today on johncombest.com linked to a conversation we had back in May where I suggested that the company would be wise to sell it maybe to China. I think the dynamics of that have changed since Trump got elected. But I think the company would be wise to offload its crop protection products, be it dicamba, be it other selective herbicides, or be it Roundup. Yeah. And you know, you could look at this Wall Street Journal piece a couple different ways, Brad. And when the CEO comes out and says, hey, it looks like we're coming to the end of the road, here's his quote. I want to make sure I get it right. We're pretty much reaching the end of the road. We're talking months, not years. Now, he's not talking in this piece about selling it. He's saying about the fact that we being Bayer, we might just stop producing it if the litigation situation doesn't get better. So one way to look at this, Brad, is you could look at it as a big, giant corporation crying wolf and saying, oh, yeah, if you guys keep being mean to us in the courts, we're not even going to sell this stuff, and you're going to see how much you like it then. But I also think that the company is prepping its investors and prepping its, get ready for it, Brad, prepping its stakeholders for the idea that the company is going to start selling off its crop protection assets. Anyway, we've discussed this at length before, Brad. I know we have a lot of new listeners in the last month due to the increased signal who maybe haven't heard us talk about this before. But I'll tell the story for the third time in the 17 months that you and I have been doing this. Somewhere in Germany, there is a woman or a man who has had a document on their desktop for the last 2, 3, 4 years about how to offload Roundup and how to offload crop protection. Because Bayer is not an agriculture company. Bayer is a life sciences, pharmaceutical, consumer health company. They view agriculture and pesticides as being a dirty little thing that loses them money every year and costs them a lot in litigation. And the company would be wise to begin offloading its crop protection assets.
But would that impact their seed sales of the Roundup Ready stuff?
Boy, that is the great question, Brad. You got right to the zillion-dollar question there. So for folks who don't know, the shtick of Monsanto and Bayer was to sell seeds paired with herbicides.
Right.
So Brad, your question is exactly right. Let's say Bayer starts offloading dicamba, which goes with dicamba-tolerant seeds, or starts offloading glyphosate, which goes with glyphosate-tolerant seeds. Yes, you could expect that there would be a negative effect on its seed sales. And the thing that keeps the agriculture division at Bayer, the thing that keeps Bayer from not just spinning it off, is the fact that seed sales are profitable. But crop protection is not, because look at all these lawsuits, Brad.
You know, John, we talked about this was yesterday, the day before. You drive around the interstate system in the St. Louis area, and for every 10 billboards you see, 8 of them are either attorneys' ads or pot stores, and it sort of makes you wonder, okay, where's the real money at? In plaintiff attorneys and selling weed, right? Isn't that
Yeah,
weird?
Absolutely. Not to be confused with weed killers. And so you bring up the other great point that you and I have discussed a time or two is that 15 years ago, you would never imagine, when the old Monsanto was here, you would never imagine that the company would have trouble in Jefferson City passing anything. They could have renamed the arc, the GMO parabolic arc, and nobody would have batted an eye.
Well,
and today, you could attribute it to a lot of things, Brad. Trial lawyer money or just a general anti-corporate sentiment. How did Bayer lose the Missouri legislature? That's the question.
Well,
and there's multiple answers.
I just mentioned billboards, and I have to tell you, have you seen the glyphosate? I can never say it. Say it for me again.
Glyphosate, yeah.
Glyphosate. Have you seen the glyphosate billboards?
I see them all the time, Brad. Yeah. I don't know which ones you're talking about, but I've seen multiple, yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, man, they're putting a full court press on this deal, aren't they? Okay,
they sure are.
We have to take a break. We'll be back. Lots of stuff to talk about. Man, there's some weird stories in the news, and John and I are going to delve into them. And I'll tease this by saying, did you hear, I think it was just released this morning, about all the local visas, the student visas that are being canceled? Have you heard about this?
No, I had it up on my website yesterday.
Oh, it was – never mind. See, John always makes me look like a stooge because, hey,
no,
John.
I don't. It's just if it was yesterday's story, yeah, it was up on my website yesterday.
Do you know about this? And he go, well, it's only on my site for the last 3 weeks, the number 4 story. Oh, sorry, John. Okay,